All right, today we're talking about how you can walk away from a ruthlessly competitive corporate environment and actually start your own business. My guest today, that is her story. Her name is Carrie Schochet. I'll tell you more about her in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. And every week we talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. And if you look at the archives, we've got Netflix and Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, lots of great episodes there for you as well. And before we get into this interview, this episode is brought to you by our company, Rise 25, where we help businesses to give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you to run your podcast and content marketing. We are an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do three things, which are strategy, accountability, and full execution. And we even invented what some are calling the Wix of B2B podcasting. It's our platform, Podcast Copilot. And, Carrie, I know from researching your background, from our previous conversations, that for you, relationships are incredibly important, have been incredibly important throughout your career. And that's how I feel as well. And I love the ability of every week being able to talk to smart entrepreneurs and founders and share their stories like we will here today. So anyone who wants to learn about what that looks like, you can go to our website at rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. All right. And so my guest is Carrie Schochet. She's the founder and CEO of Purple Squirrel Advisors. It's a boutique executive search firm. They're based out of Michigan. She went to University of Notre Dame and spent the beginning of her career in Chicago, including at one of the nation's leading recruitment and staffing firms, and eventually decided that that was not the long-term plan for her, moved back to the Detroit area and founded Purple Squirrel Advisors. And now she specializes in connecting C-level and senior executives with leadership positions in finance, accounting, human resources, and a bunch of other areas. And we're going to dive into her story. And Carrie, so excited to have you here today. And I love to get to know what people were like when they were growing up, because a lot of times I think that feeds who we are today. You were a competitive soccer player, traveled around the world. That was kind of your background. And something else that jumped out at me is you skied down trash dumps. You had trash dumps that were turned into ski hills, you said, which sounds traumatizing, but the way that you put it, it wasn't. It seemed like it wasn't as traumatic as it sounds, but it sounds like a Slumdog Millionaire kind of story. But tell me a little bit about what it was like slaloming down these trash dumps.
So you would never know that they were essentially landfills that got covered in dirt and turned into little ski hills in southeastern Michigan. So we've got two or three of them. Certainly not traumatizing at all. Many people don't even know the backstory. I just know it from having grown up in the area. But yeah, so essentially, yeah, they just take these landfills and they repurpose them and, put lots of dirt, and I'm sure they sanitize them in other ways. I would hope. But yeah, when you're skiing there, you have no idea what the history is of that land. So, but I will say as a skier, I don't really prefer to ski on those hills. I don't really spend my time there today as an adult. If I want to ski, I like to go out west. I'll go up to northern Michigan. We've got some decent skiing in northern Michigan. So I'll put in the extra effort to drive that distance or jump on an airplane if I really want to ski.
Yeah, and skiing does play a part in your story a little bit later, so we'll get back to that. But it certainly seems like great gist with your kids, because everyone has to have a story of walking to school both ways uphill in the snow that you tell your kids. And so right. Kids, we're skiing at this nice resort now. Look, when I was a kid, we were skiing down trash dumps. At least you're not skiing down a trash dump.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I love to tell those stories to the kids. And certainly being a parent, I have to dig into some of my stories and figure out ways to connect with each of them and inspire them and all that. So yeah, but that's a good, yeah, for sure.
So tell us a little about you start down the corporate route and you are doing recruiting, and you worked at a couple of larger firms. Tell us a little about the early days of getting involved in recruiting. What drew you to the field?
Yeah, so that's a great question, actually. To back up just a little bit, so when I started at Notre Dame, I was actually pre-med. That didn't last very long, and then I pivoted to the business school, and so I ended up um, starting out with finance. I love math. It came naturally to me. I really kind of have enjoyed that analytical type of work, but I also have always had a creative interest, creative side. So I also started taking classes in the art school and just for fun. And so I took 18 credits every semester. I actually graduated with dual degrees. And I think that plays into my story a little bit that like I really didn't know what I wanted to be like when I grew up. And I think that's a challenge a lot of kids have. And I'm actually passionate about it today of like, how can we educate kids at a younger age as to like really what the career paths are and what does it mean to be an accountant? What does the day-to-day activity look like? What does it mean to be an investment banker or an engineer? Like, so anyway, I just didn't, have a lot of that context. And so I ended up starting my career in litigation consulting. Which has a potential to be very interesting for certain types of people, but it wasn't interesting to me. And I was really miserable in my first job. And I spent like about a year and a half doing that. It was a grueling 100 hours a week. Like,
Mm.
and I like to joke it was investment banking hours and I wasn't making investment banking money. And after about a year and a half of doing that, I decided to quit. I actually worked in retail for a few months. I felt like I needed a reset. Like
You
my
worked at
entry into the
You worked at Nordstrom, right? Which of course is
exactly.
famous for over-the-top customer service. There are these crazy stories about it. Did you experience any of that, or did you learn a
Yeah,
little
for
about the customer
sure.
service?
Yeah, and yeah, for sure. And I definitely learned some things about me just even in that retail experience. I was good with customers. It kind of came naturally to me. I liked it. I liked that interaction. I liked the pace. So I was kind of learning as I was going, and I did the retail job for about 6 months, and then I realized, okay, like this isn't what I'm going to do forever. A friend of mine had been placed by a recruiter, and I didn't know anything about the recruiting industry. Um, and so I showed up at an interview at Robert Half, and they recruited me to work for them, like kind of on the spot. They were like, okay, you've got a finance background, you've got this like a little bit of sales experience, you've got the personality to talk to people. And they recruited me to work for them. And like literally 2 weeks later, I found myself like learning and working a full recruiting desk, meaning
Mm.
I was, split between interacting and trying to bring in clients and recruiting. And so that's kind of how I landed in recruiting. I joke that I'm like an accidental recruiter. A lot of people end up in the field exactly the way I did. Um, but I liked it out of the gates because of the variety and talking to all these different people. I liked the fact that I was more in control of my destiny in that role than I was in litigation consulting, as an example. So that's kind of how I ended up in the field and really just again loved the pace, loved the variety, loved learning about all these different businesses and the people.
And the controlling your own destiny piece, explain to me what you mean by that. I'm assuming what you mean is that you get commissioned if you
Yeah,
make a placement,
yeah,
right? So it's a little bit
exactly.
more,
Yeah.
okay.
So yeah, so it was a grind. I mean, don't get me wrong. It was a little bit like that movie, like the stock, like what's the stockbroker movie from a
Oh,
couple of
Wall Street?
yeah, I mean it
Yeah.
was cubicles and people with
Mm,
headsets on
mm,
and you're pounding the phone. Like it
yeah.
was not an easy
Or
job. A lot
Boiler
of
Room, I think, is
rejection.
another
Yeah,
one.
boiler
People
room
were,
type
yeah,
of
Boiler
thing.
Room. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
a lot of
Yeah.
rejection, a lot of internal competition.
Were you like
But yeah, it
cold
was a
calling?
lot of cold calling. Yeah. And
Really?
so we were
Wow.
measured by how many cold calls we made, how many connects we made, how many visits we set. I mean, lots of metrics and lots
Mm,
of activity. And
mm,
so, but I liked it because if I hustled and I worked hard, I would get paid for that. And
hmm.
whereas in my first job, I worked a ton. I had worked tremendously hard. I worked lots of hours and I was on a salary and I got a small bonus. So
Hmm.
like that was very demotivating for me. I was like, gosh, if I put in 100 hours of work, you know, and end
Yeah.
up with X, like I'm
And
essentially
And there
working minimum
definitely
wage.
this definitely shows signs of that entrepreneurship would be a good fit for you because it's much more eat what you kill type of
Right.
environment.
Yeah.
So you did this for a few years, and then you have one child and then a second child. You go out on maternity leave the second time, and this time you have a very negative experience coming back because of dynamics with a partner
Mhm.
at the company you came back to, or the firm you came back to. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so again, I mean, there's a lot of great things about Robert Half, or I'm sure the culture's similar at other large firms. Again, internally competitive. That's how they drive results. And
Yeah.
so, but as you kind of go through there, I was there for almost 10 years. It is difficult to be gone for a period of time. How is your book going to be managed? All of those types of things. So there were some dynamics that went on, and ultimately, my job wasn't protected while I was out on maternity leave. And I had a difficult conversation the day I came back. And there had been signals for me along the way that I wanted to do something different, or I wanted to do it a different way. But it's hard to leave. You start, you have, again, a book of business, a track record. Uh, and I think for me, the fear of the unknown.
Mm.
I just didn't know what was on the other side. I had spent the majority of my career there. And I'll never forget, I had a boss that once said, because I actually had taken a counter offer, or I'd taken a new job at one other point in time, and Robert Half came back and gave me a counter offer. And I remember my boss at the time saying, listen, Carrie, it's a decision between the devil you know and the devil you don't. And that really stuck with me. And for whatever reason, I decided to stick with the safety at that time.
Hmm.
But then rolling forward the tape and coming back from maternity leave and feeling really unsupported, I was like, enough is enough. Like, I'm going to see what's on the other side. Like, this is it.
Yeah.
And there'd been a desire for me and my husband. We had been kind of contemplating moving back to Michigan. And this was kind of the push that I needed. And
Yeah.
so I look back on that moment. It was incredibly difficult. My husband was a stay-at-home dad. I
Oh,
had two
wow.
little
So
ones
that
at
makes it
home.
even
So
harder.
we
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
living on
One
we were living
income.
like I was the breadwinner.
Yeah.
I had three
Yeah.
people counting on me. And so there was a tremendous amount of pressure, but I'm really close with my family. My parents said, come back to Michigan. We moved in with them for like a period of
With
time.
two
And while
kids.
we, with two kids,
Oh, man.
and we have stories about that. But yeah, I was so lucky to have that support system, and we came to Michigan, and I started figuring
Before
out
we
what it
get
meant to
to
be. Mhm.
that, I want to slow this down and go back to that day that you came back from your second maternity leave because my wife and I have four kids, and so she's come back for four different maternity leaves
Yeah.
because she still works. And what was that like for you coming back, all the emotions that you get from leaving your second child,
Yeah.
leaving your husband there? I know that moms experience a ton of emotions and
Yeah.
guilt going back
Yeah.
to work, and you go back, and the day you get back, you alluded to a harsh or difficult conversation.
Right.
What was that like?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like, I almost feel like I was operating on adrenaline. I can practically like put myself back in that desk and in that room. And I'd only been back like an hour, and I was having a call with my boss, and he told me he was putting me on a PIP. And I was like, what? And my first reaction wasn't to be sad, or um I was just mad. And I was like,
This was for
really?
performance from before you had left
Well,
for your
well,
maternity
that what I
leave,
said, I
obviously.
was
It
like, I
wasn't
don't know.
like
I
you
was like,
weren't
I'm not
working
sure.
while you're on
Yeah,
maternity
like,
leave.
I'm not, what performance are you referring to? Because I just got back from maternity leave this morning. And I
Yeah.
was like, and I've got awards lined up on my desk from all of my time here, and I said, I've never had a negative performance review. So I'm really confused as to what performance you could be referencing. And I just called him out. I was like, what you're attempting to do is illegal. And I mean, so it like, I probably, in retrospect, I probably could have handled it a little differently. I could have been a little softer. I could have let it play out a little bit more.
But you were mad.
But I was mad. I was fired up, and I was like, no, I'm not going to accept this. This is wrong. And I was kind of like, come and get me, try. And that was, so it did not go well from there. Like, I
Yeah.
stayed for a little bit because it wasn't, I mean, they
So you
weren't
didn't
firing me in
march
that.
out with your
Yeah,
cardboard
no, I
box
mean, they
full of
weren't.
stuff, but it was
Well,
the,
then it became a dance. You know what I mean? It became a dance of,
yeah.
and so yeah, it was not a pleasant time, super stressful. But
How hard
again,
was it then to also move geographies? Because you moved from Chicago to Michigan. So was it hard to start a new company in a new place, even though you were
oh,
from Michigan originally? Because sometimes
oh,
then that means like you got to build over your network and everything too.
yeah, no, incredibly difficult. And, I didn't know what I didn't know. Again, like if I, like,
And this is also
again, I,
pre-COVID we're talking about here. Like now, I think people are more used to and comfortable with working remotely or working with
yeah.
a recruitment firm that's not located down the block from them. But this is a different era.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I didn't know what I didn't know. It wasn't like I like decided in that instance I'm going to move and I'm going to go out on my own. I kind of felt like the universe, like I kind of felt I look back on that moment as like a really challenging moment, but it ended up being a gift, because I think that was my opportunity to like get out of my comfort zone, figure out what was on that other side, the devil I didn't know, which in this case, it was a huge change. And, I explored other jobs. I explored like joining a recruiting firm here. I ultimately ended up kind of joining forces with a group that was based in Chicago. And they said, hey, like we formed kind of an interesting partnership. And I kind of got on my feet, like working with them. But
A lot of new business founders, myself included, I think find some kind of like hybrid that gives them a little bit of a security blanket or something
yeah.
like that
Mhm.
that gets them going for the first couple of years.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I had. And I maintain a close friendship relationship with the founders of that group. And I filled a critical need for them. They were early in their entrepreneurial journey. They needed a strong recruiter. They had more demand than they could handle. And so I was a great solution for them too, because I was an experienced recruiter and they were able to hand me recruiting projects that I could manage independently. And at the same time, I was trying to figure out how to grow a business in Michigan and develop a network. And so it
Yeah.
was great for both of us. It worked out really, really well. And gave me enough of like a little safety net where I didn't feel like I was going to put my family's
Yeah.
financial security at risk and all that. Because again, I still had the husband and the two kids that were
Yeah.
relying on
Yeah.
me. So
How long did you stay living in the parents' house?
it was a little longer than expected. It was maybe like it was about 9 months. We were gonna
Yeah.
buy um like one of my parents' friends' house. They were building a new house and we were gonna buy their house. It was turnkey, really nice. It was in the neighborhood I grew up in, but their house was taking longer and ultimately like we decided we had to go look for something else. But it was super competitive. Like at that time, the real estate market is I think it remains pretty competitive, but a house would go on the market and they had 20 people in our price bracket lined up and
Yeah.
they were final best in final by tomorrow at noon. And so I think that took a little bit longer, but yeah, we lived with my parents for 9 months and then we actually lived with them a second time when we decided to remodel that house, so for another like 6 months. So
Wow. Wow. You guys must get along well, or well enough anyways.
yeah.
You also set out a goal. Many businesses sometimes go very broad and then eventually find a niche. And you figured out that you wanted to do business with private equity because private equity tend to have like kind of a portfolio of
Yeah.
businesses. And so you set towards that goal. So talk a little bit about how you set out to
Yeah.
pursue that.
Sure. So when I was at Robert Half, I had worked with clients of all different types and sizes and, broad array. And I found over time that I really liked working with like the small to mid-sized business more so than the Fortune 500. And, I actually worked in strategic accounts for Robert Half. So I dealt with like managing contracts with those large customers. And it's, again, like the contract process could take a year or longer to kind of get through and begin working with a big company. And so I found that the small to mid-sized businesses were more nimble and, all of that. And I just was interested in those. So that was like the first thing. I was like, okay, I want to be a small to mid-sized business specialist. And then I had some exposure to private equity. I'd worked with some private equity clients there. My brother was in private equity and it just interested me with my finance background. And so I decided that was the target. And again, with a private equity firm, they have all these different portfolio companies. And so if you build a relationship at the fund level, then their needs are ongoing or recurring more so than a single small to mid-sized business. And so that was really the thought process out of the gates.
And I mean, that's a great goal. It's great ambition, but a lot of businesses struggle, because that seems like a big, hairy, audacious goal. So like, how do you like get a foothold, or how do you build relationships in that industry? So what did you do? Did you start knocking on doors?
Well,
Go
no,
back
so
to
I
your cold calling
started.
days?
Well, first of all, I think also back to your point too about moving to Michigan, and what I underestimated is like that I grew up here, but I'd never done business here. And I didn't have any real connections in the business community. And I underestimated how difficult it was going to be to kind of break in,
Mm.
because it's very different than a big city like Chicago, New York, where people are constantly coming in and leaving, and there's so much change. With Detroit, we've got a lot of people that like have been here for a long time, and
So you're
so
competing
breaking
with
in
people who had been there a long time.
long
Yeah.
standing
Okay.
relationships and all that. So
Okay.
that made it a little harder. But I started just again trying to figure things out, and I started going to networking groups with the Association for Corporate Growth. So I started going to their events very early on. That's a very M&A focused community. I now serve on their board.
Hmm.
I started knocking on the door of Financial Executives International, which is a group primarily for CFOs. I got involved in all different types of networking, and ultimately I kind of gravitated the most towards those two. Going to events, I mean, morning events, evening events. Like I was burning the candle at both ends. And in the meantime, I was
And with
writing
two kids
resumes.
at home.
Yeah, I was writing
Yeah.
resumes. I was writing LinkedIn profiles. I mean, I was hustling. I was like, okay, I'm going to make $1,000 here. I'm going to make, I was just
Mm.
like trying to figure out how to get my feet on the ground and get to know people, and just tons of networking. So that's kind of, but my strategy for getting in with private equity was to build relationships with like the people that surround the decision maker, like centers of influence. And so trying to build relationships with attorneys and CPAs and bankers and coaches and all these different people. And I realized too, like the CFO type network was also good to build, but I could add value. Like I was trying to think, how can I add value to these people, build a relationship with them, and be useful? And so that's where I started a group for CFOs in transition,
You
and that was called
started a
CFO.
group for CFOs in transition. That's an
Yeah, and
interesting idea. So
the
what was
way that
that?
the way that that happened is I was cold calling for jobs, and I found a pretty prominent local privately held business that was looking for essentially a CFO. They wouldn't give it to me retained. That was not possible. It was just
And
that I
what
didn't
does
have any
that
credit.
mean for those that don't understand? What does that
So
mean?
in retained searches where we're in a committed exclusive relationship to conduct a search. And generally it takes, you got to have credibility. They're committing, money up front to get going on a search. And so I wasn't counting on getting retained searches initially. So I was doing contingent work, which is, if
Yeah,
you place
yeah.
the candidate, you get the fee. But I would always often ask for, hey, will you give it to me exclusive contingent, even for 5 days? Like,
Hmm.
so that I could have a little bit of an edge to compete against the larger firms. But I had this job, and I started talking to CFOs, and I was getting questions like, well, hey, what do you think of my resume? And can you give me any feedback? And I decided, hey, here's an opportunity. If I can get a small little group of CFOs who are looking for a new job together, then I can help them all at once and
And
provide
once
a format.
they are in a company, then they'll hopefully hire you or bring you in to place other positions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just again being helpful. I read this book called The Go Giver, which I think really influenced some
Bob
of
Berg,
my
yeah, I had him on my
yeah.
podcast a while back. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so I read The Go Giver, and I just was really focused on like, okay, I don't have a lot of jobs, but I can provide value other ways. So like
Yeah.
really doing that. And that CFO group was really instrumental in my early success. I was helping them, but they were helping me. They were helping me to understand the automotive mindset and just Detroit, the business landscape. So that was really important. And I met with that group twice a month, and we met really consistently like up through COVID, where it was a
Mm.
really active group, and made some great friends, and ultimately got clients through that. And I mean,
I
to this day,
love that idea of like taking control of your own destiny and starting your own community or starting your own group, because then you are the person, you're the glue, you're the person that brings all these people together, and you kind of create your own velvet rope, your own exclusivity to it.
well, yeah. And then what was cool about that too is then all of a sudden, I had something to offer some of these other people. Like hey, a CPA firm, hey, could you come in and talk to this group? And I mean,
Mm,
again, they're building their network, or so I
yeah.
was bringing in guest speakers, and I had something to offer.
So all of a
Absent
sudden, instead of like reaching out and every outreach is a request or asking for something from someone, you can use that as a give. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was really, really awesome. And from that CFO Next group, we ended up with some partners. And so I've got other strategic partners that support those groups now. But we ended up starting a group for working CFOs called CFO Now. And that's a group where we bring together working CFOs once a month to discuss, challenges in a confidential environment and get peer review. So that was kind of the spin-off of the CFO Next group
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. So how long did it take for you to build this to something a little bit larger where you had others working for you and it wasn't just you doing all of the work yourself?
So my sister worked with me initially. So the first 2 years when I was in Michigan, I was by myself, and that was under kind of the other banner. And then I started Purple Squirrel officially, like launched it in January of 2025. My sister was coming back into the workforce. She had been a stay-at-home mom for a period of time, and she said, "Hey, like, I'd love to join you in this and help on the back end." And she found that she loved recruiting, and so it was just the two of us for maybe like a year. And then we brought on another recruiter. And in my first like 3 or 4 years, like we were doubling every year.
Mm.
So I mean, all of the seeds that I had planted and the work that I had done in those first 2 years in Michigan, like they started paying off. Like I had a retained search like on day one of opening up Purple Squirrel Advisors. And like
Mm.
that first year, was just I was getting great momentum, I think, because of all that work that I'd done in those other two
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
And then I think it's important too. I'd love to share like what the Purple Squirrel name is, because that like influences what I did. Or, it's built
Yeah.
on what
How'd
I
you come
had.
up with that?
So purple squirrel's a recruiting industry term referring to the elusive perfect candidate. So the
Mm.
unicorn. And when I first came to Michigan, I only dealt with like what I would say are the true purple squirrels, highly technical, rural, niche, something super difficult about the search. So
Hmm.
that's the type of work I did in the early days here in Michigan, trying to just build a reputation. And then when I started the company, I was like, okay, every search is the search for a purple squirrel if you're really trying to get it right, if you're trying to match the culture and all of that. So that's the origin of the name. But like I'd done a couple of those purple squirrel searches and started,
What was the
say,
most when you said rural? Is that what you said? Rural, like it's
well,
like
yeah, like
the
rural, like
locations in a rural
yeah, rural
location? Okay.
location.
Okay.
Well, so it's funny. I actually placed a food scientist here in Michigan with a food company. Obviously, it was also in a difficult location, and there's not very many food companies in Michigan. And that was a really tricky one. But what's crazy about it is I just heard from the person I placed, 12 years ago. She checked in with me. And so
Yeah,
that
that's
was
cool.
really, really cool. And she's still
Yeah,
at the company.
that's cool.
So it was 12 or 13 years ago. I placed a controller at a very rural market, and it was a publicly traded company, and there wasn't another publicly traded company within 100 miles. And they needed
Wow.
to have the SEC reporting experience. Super tricky.
So it's
And they had an
definitely
activist investor.
in each of these cases it is they're gonna have to move their family, right? So you
Yeah,
gotta really
or
convince. Yeah.
if you can find somebody that's in the area that maybe worked at a public company prior. So
Mm.
yeah, super difficult or kind of nichey searches like that.
Yeah. And what are those conversations like? Like when you have a conversation with someone, you're trying to sell them on this idea. Okay, all right, hear me out, right? We got this great opportunity. We'll talk about location later. I'll get to
Yeah.
that.
No, I mean, honestly, like, so I think with every search, there's like, we always talk to our clients and figure out like, what are the selling points? Why would somebody want to come work here? And kind of we're marketers as much as we're anything else,
Yeah.
and figuring out what are the positives. And, even if there are some really challenging circumstances going on at the company, then I'm like, okay, this is a resume building opportunity for somebody. They're going to help you solve these like really difficult challenges. And like, if they can help, if they can have an impact in this role, think about what that does for their future. They
Yeah.
can talk about helping the company overcome this stuff.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's for the right candidate, every negative is a positive, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You had started EOS, implementing EOS in the fall of 2019, just before COVID hit, and you credit that with helping your business to survive through COVID. So take us back to, it's actually, we're recording this right around 5 years now from when COVID
Mhm.
hit. But what was that like for you when that started to unfold, when everything, the world started to shut down?
My gosh, I'm sure, like, in terms of what it was like for me personally, like, I'm sure it's a lot of people felt the same way. It was totally overwhelming. Um, couldn't imagine what was going to happen. I was totally fearful that my business was just going to get decimated. And actually, the opposite happened. We actually grew in 2020 and in 2021, like gangbusters. I mean, it was crazy recruiting environment. But definitely a tremendous amount of fear and difficulty. All of a sudden, all my kids were all at home, and we were trying to juggle being working parents and helping kids with online learning and all those other things that we all dealt with during that time. But I definitely credit EOS with our ability to kind of navigate through that, go to entirely remote, and to thrive. So we were already using Zoom prior to that because we did a lot of virtual interviewing. We were working outside of Michigan. So Zoom was something
Mm,
we were very comfortable with. And so I think that helped that we were already using that technology. And then the structure of EOS, the weekly meetings, the goal setting, all of that really just helped us to stay on track. And we started publishing a lot of video content on our LinkedIn page. But again, I think it was the weekly meetings and keeping the team aligned that helped us to really thrive in that type of situation. And then the recruiting environment, I would never have imagined kind of the impacts of the recruiting environment and how much recruiting would happen in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And we
yeah.
did have a couple of big clients. In fact, one of the CFOs that I met through that CFO group, he was CFO of a really growing business that was it was in the cleaning supply space, which
Mhm.
obviously there was a
Yeah.
tremendous demand for cleaning supplies.
Yeah.
So we helped with a lot of positions in that business. And
Yeah.
yeah, it ended up just being
Yeah.
surprisingly really great for us.
So that prepared you for what happened to you in 2024. In 2024, beginning of the year, you were in a horrible ski accident where you blew out your knee. You were run over by another skier, knocked out. Take us back to that. How did that unfold?
Yeah, so gosh, I mean, it was one of the most challenging probably events that I've ever been through. And
This is
leading
not
up to that,
on a trash dump at the time,
no,
just to clarify.
I was in Park City, and it was the first day, second run, and I was just kind of doing my thing. I'm very comfortable on skis. I raced in high school, and I was, kind of facing side mountain, and all of a sudden I got just hit from behind. I felt like I'd gotten hit by a truck, and then the person's skis went on top of mine, got all tangled up. I felt my knee kind of explode, and I knew I was getting seriously injured. So like it was difficult even just to like I was kind of having flashbacks after the accident of
Mm,
like that moment in time where I remember I literally felt like my life flashed before my eyes. I remember
mm.
thinking, "Oh my gosh, like I'm getting seriously injured. Am I going to be in a wheelchair? Am I going to be paralyzed?" Like my brain was like, "This is bad." And then I don't remember some of the moments after, and then I've
Wow.
been dealing with that ever since. But I think what made it harder for me too was that I'd been kind of on like a personal health journey over the last few years, and I felt like I was in like the best shape that I'd been in maybe since I was in high school playing
Mm,
competitive soccer and running cross country and skiing, and like I was feeling great
mm.
physically. And so I think for me it was this like loss. I felt a really strong sense of loss. And honestly, to this day, I still feel it of like I lost like that optimal physical feel, like how I felt at that time. And
Yeah, because you
so
lose the ability to use your knee. It affects so many things. Yeah,
yeah, and
ability to do
I
all
mean
that
to this
stuff.
day, like I still have knee pain. Just like when
Mm,
I'm
mm,
super active. I work out, almost probably 5 days a week. I like to hike and bike and do all kinds of things, and like even just simple walking around the neighborhood. Like I have knee pain
mm,
some days,
mm, mm.
and I'm still doing physical therapy and kind of working through compensations and things. So like it was hard. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it was hard. But somebody said to me, oh, like someday you're gonna like this will be it, like something you're gonna be grateful for. And I'm like, okay, that's a huge stretch. But I will say, like, I've noticed a couple things that I can be grateful for. Not, I'm not grateful for the accident, but I can be grateful for some of the things I've learned. Um, I stepped away, I worked a lot less in 2024, and my team like really like rose to the occasion. And so like that term letting go of the vine, I think that this accident kind of forced me to let go of the vine and get out of like a lot of the day to day of of Purple Squirrel. And my team did great of handling that. I
And that
learned,
was a tough year too, because I've talked to a lot of other recruiting agencies. 2024 was a presidential election year. The economy was starting
yeah,
to kind of recalibrate inflation. Economy was recalibrating from, the years of COVID
yeah.
growth and kind of readjust. So at the same time, it wasn't a great economic environment for you to suffer that kind of setback.
No, and it's funny because somehow I just had a lot of peace. Like we were down last year from a revenue standpoint, but I kind of was like, well, maybe that's a good thing. It's given me an opportunity to kind of refocus on my health and like I had optimism that we would come back stronger this year and I would come back stronger. And I kind of looked at like I really just didn't stress that much about us being down because I knew that my peers, other recruiting firms were down in some cases worse. And so I just kind of figured like we're going to weather this storm. Maybe it's a blessing because I don't have to be worried about the business being busy when I have to do all these appointments and surgery and everything else. And so like I really didn't worry that much about it. Um, and I just kind of said it is what it is. And like we're going to continue to work hard. We're going to service the clients we have. We're going to do a great job. And I kind of knew like as I started getting towards the end of 2024, I was like, all right, now it's time to like double down. I want to have a great 2025, but I just didn't worry about the business that much in
Yeah.
2024, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's great that you were able to do that. There's so many people that, would struggle through that. So they have the health crisis and then they also have the business anxiety at the same time. I want to ask a business model question, and then we're almost out of time here, but I know that your focus of the firm has been retained searches, and it sounds like that is kind of an ideal situation. Gives you greater predictable, gives you revenue up front,
Mhm.
predictable revenue, security, all that kind of stuff. Was Did you at some point say like we're drawing the line, or do you say that we're only doing retained search? Or is that something where, you say as a business model, we're going to move towards that, but there's certain types of clients that we will not do retained if they're not ready to agree to that yet? Like how does that work for your business model now?
Yeah, so what I've found is that I really love the retained model, and because I feel that we're really in a partnership with our clients, and that's something that's really important to me because we're not just providing resumes or candidates, like we're running a full process, and I think that I really enjoy that aspect of the work that we do, of being able to like work with the client on the front end. We help them to define their job, the position spec, and think about what should our process look like, our interview process. And like I feel like that alignment is really important to have that type of relationship. And so we have tried to work in certain contingent situations, and I just end up getting frustrated because you're not an advisor, you're not a partner to the client, generally speaking. I mean, in some cases you could be, but it's just not the same type of relationship. And so for me, it's really important to have that because I like to have those partnerships with the clients and really work side by side with them to make sure we get the best outcome. I think that sometimes with other models, the recruiter can be incentivized just to get their candidate placed versus getting the absolute best candidate for the company. And so that's where I think the difference is.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Carrie. I want to wrap up with a final question, which is my gratitude question. So I'm a big fan of practicing gratitude. You've mentioned the word gratitude a couple of times in this interview, but I love for giving our guests a little bit of space to pick out any people, especially peers or contemporaries, or maybe mentors who've been in your life and continue to be in your life. So is there anyone in particular that you'd want to, thank publicly for helping you through it all?
I'm not a particular person, but I would want to thank like the communities that I've been a part of, and like for example, the EO community has been amazing, and I've learned so much and I've grown so much through all my colleagues on the board, and just the opportunities that have been presented through the EO global community have been amazing and life changing. So I have gratitude for EO. I have gratitude for a lot of people in my network in Detroit with the ACG and FEI. But I have a lot of gratitude for my husband too. And just the support that he's provided along the way, and being a sounding board when things are going well or going difficult. So those are the people that stand out to me in this moment.
Carrie, where can people go to learn more about you and Purple Squirrel?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm the only Carrie Schochet out there. Or our website is www.purplesquirreladvisors.com.
Great. Thanks so much, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.